Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, I'm covering the newest machine of war in this video, the Adepta Sororitas Exorcist Artillery Tank. The artillery tank is looking to be another crucial meta piece, particularly within the Psyker Team, and that can be good or bad news depending on your perspective. I'll talk you through everything, but I'm not looking forward to finding even more Imperial badges for the seemingly unending Imperial favoritism. Machines of war have no stats of their own since they aren't deployable, but they have a primary and secondary ability. The primary ability, Thrice Blessed Conflagration, is what makes this machine particularly impressive. This ability targets one of your friendly units on the battlefield and gives a 20% bonus damage with ranged attacks against enemies on fire hexes for the next 5 rounds. If that unit is an Adepta Sororitas, it gains that additional damage with all attacks, so melee and ranged, as long as the target is on fire. After applying that buff effect, it then does flame damage to enemies in a line originating from the original buff target. The ability starts on a 1-turn cooldown. It's quite wordy and complex, but we'll look at the gameplay shortly. The secondary ability, Devastating Refrain, is marginally more straightforward. It marks a hex on the battlefield and 3 additional adjacent hexes. After 1 turn, the machine does blast damage to those marked hexes. Each enemy hit has a chance to increase the ticker on the Adepta Sororitas faction trait, Act of Faith. This ability too has a 1-turn cooldown. Let's start by taking a look at the primary ability, Thrice Blessed Conflagration. In this clip here, we can see that when Darkstrider is initially targeted by the primary ability, all that happens is he gains the 20% damage buff to targets on fire hexes. The second part of the primary ability doesn't trigger because it requires enemies to be adjacent to the buffed target. On our next turn, Darkstrider moves adjacent to Bellator. This time, when the primary ability is used, it also does flame damage to Bellator and sets his hex on fire, allowing our buffed character to benefit from the bonus damage. What about for the Adepta Sororitas? Well, they can benefit from the primary in melee too. Here, a Silver 1 Morven Veil does about 800 damage to Bellator in melee, but that damage increases after the primary comes into play. The secondary ability is free to use and plays out like an artillery attack. Initially, you can see how Morven has no stacks of Act of Faith. The Exorcist machine uses Devastating Refrain on Show, marking Show's hex and the 3 others next to him in a non-adjacent fashion. After hitting a bunch of the Tau with the artillery tank on the following turn, we can see how Morven now has Act of Faith stacks. It's essentially an artillery area of effect attack that has upside for your Adepta Sororitas. As you'll see in this clip, there is no friendly fire to your units if they get hit. Also, note that the fire pattern is always the same, in that sort of Y shape. In Tournament Arena or any mode where your machine of war is on the north side of the map, the shape is simply inverted. So where might the machine be useful? It is clear that the primary ability likes ranged damage dealers, but sadly the raid meta is devoid of a good ranged team outside of the Psyker Team. Your typical Psyker Team looks a little bit like this, and the Neurothrope seems the perfect target to benefit. A 20% damage boost is huge, and the team has plenty of ways to generate the fire hex effect through characters like Ahriman, Roswitha, and Abraxas. This isn't an exact science nor a perfect run, but I tested against level 5 Mortarion, and the combined changes of Ahriman and the Exorcist over the Forge Fiend led to an increase in total damage from 540k to 665k. Clearly this is at max settings, and I recognize that no one will have that built, but it gives you a flavor that this machine is an upgrade for a team that sorely needs some help to keep up with the meta. I'll let this replay run on screen for you to enjoy for a while. The secondary ability is a bit tamer, and that fits generally with how Snowprint have designed their machines. As a free-to-use ability, the secondaries are typically less impactful, and we see that with the Exorcist. I don't think I'll invest too heavily into the secondary ability, given how thin my Imperial resources are already stretched. The Adepta Sororitas are also sometimes used at the highest level against the Corrodius side boss fight. The idea here is you build stacks on them by using characters like Ulf and Brother Jaeger. Then you unload on a final turn with a big burst of critical hit damage from your sisters. The secondary from the Exorcist helps add stacks over the course of the battle and then can grant your Sororitas 20% damage for that final killing turn. We're familiar by now with incursions and how they run. Essentially, every live ops cycle you pick the machine of war you want to progress and then spend the event earning shards and rewards for that machine. For the Exorcist machine, we use Xeno's characters in the event. The event introduces 2 new NPCs. The first is the Battle Sister. This is a generic NPC with physical melee damage and a surprisingly far-reaching range 3 bolter attack. It's fairly straightforward but also has the Adepta Sororitas faction trait, Act of Faith, to go with her starting 10% crit chance. The second NPC is the Zephyrim. This NPC adds the Deep Strike and Flying traits to the Act of Faith. It has a power melee attack, base 10% crit chance, and a cool passive that gives it bonus damage, block chance, and block amount for the first 2 rounds of the game. As with the other newer incursions, you can choose to start right at the end of the track and pick and choose your route to completion. In the absence of too many other talking points, I figured I could also show you some graphs and math for this machine of war. We'll look at both the primary and secondary abilities in turn. I have Talon, Tacticus, Ambassador, and Friend to thank for these lovely graphs. Remember that blue is a character's total health and red is how much the ability damage does. We have recreated those same graphs with the secondary too, this time with more of an orange hue to represent the blast damage from the secondary. As you can see for both graphs, the damage component of the abilities isn't that impressive, demonstrating that the utility here is from the added text. For the primary, that's the 20% damage bonus for the character for 5 rounds, or for the secondary, the Act of Faith stacks. As usual, I have my infographic for you to enjoy and share with your guildmates if you wish. On this slide here, I have summarized the machine abilities at various inflection points. I'll leave this on screen briefly for you to digest or screenshot if you'd like. The inflection point for the primary ability to reach 20% bonus damage and the full 5 turns of the damage buff is at level 36. If you haven't seen my updated Machine of War guide for 2025, I'd recommend checking it out. I've used the same assessment model for this machine. I think its utility will largely be in raids, with the primary ability being great on the Psyker Team and both abilities being useful in combination in niche situations like against side boss Corrodius. I'm less convinced of its utility in Guild War or Tournament Arena. It's probably fine as a free way of doing some extra damage, but as you saw on the graphs, the numbers aren't amazing. Overall, probably something you don't need to invest in as an early to mid-game player, but a necessity for the Psyker Team and end-game content. Okay, that's all I've got. I hope you found it useful, and a big shout out to my Patreons for supporting me and my content. Feel free to stop by Discord if you want to hang out or are looking for a new guild. Bye for now.